Hi everyone, welcome to Ask a Property Manager episode number 40. Today is September 30th, 2020. We're coming to you live from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at updates to the New York State Eviction Moratorium, as well as taking a look at a segment of the investment real estate industry that's not suffering right now. And we're going to answer some questions from landlords around the country. Before we do that, we're going to jump in and plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday live, 10 a.m. Eastern on Facebook. You can also catch replays the same day on our Facebook page as well as over on our YouTube page. And links for all of our social media can be found over at ownbuffalo.com. Last but not least, don't forget that we offer a free 30-minute consultation over at ownbuffalo.com as well. I do have one time slot available for tomorrow morning, and then I have a few time slots available for next week as well. Last but not least, the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drops every Thursday morning. We have a new episode coming out tomorrow that we're going to be looking at how to handle missing lease paperwork, what to do when a tenant asks for a rent reduction in the middle of a lease term, and some bookkeeping tips for your rental property. So don't miss out on that. New episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drop every Thursday morning over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. So all of that being said, we're going to jump over to desktop here. The main topic for the day is going to be, whoops, wrong spot. Main topic for the day is going to be this right here. New York State again extends the eviction moratorium on residential evictions. This has been an ongoing issue throughout basically the entire pandemic. You now have a state moratorium eviction as well as a federal moratorium eviction on residential evictions, that is. The moratorium on residential evictions in New York State has been extended through at least January 1st, 2021. The moratorium has been in place since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. In June, Governor Andrew Cuomo's Tenant Safe Harbor Act extended it through the end of New York State's state of emergency, but without a projected end date. You may remember we actually did a video on that back in June when the eviction moratorium was extended at that point. We talked about that a little bit more in depth. There is some video out there on our Facebook and YouTube page if you want to go back and take a look at that. We want to make sure that New Yorkers who are still struggling financially will not be forced from their homes as a result of COVID-19. The governor said legislative allowances are in place to provide financial assistance to residential renters and landlords, and that the additional fees for late rent payments are prohibited, so we still don't have late fees. Those facing hardship are permitted to use their security deposit as payment and can repay it over time. We've discussed that in previous episodes as well. You can definitely go back and find those. Meanwhile, the current moratorium on commercial evictions and foreclosures is effective at least through October 20th. You may remember last week we were talking pretty extensively about the Walden Galleria, which is a local mall here in the Western New York area, and how they're being impacted with the non-paying tenants, specifically L Brands, owing them almost $500,000. And that's just one corporate tenant, 3 stores, owing almost $500,000 at this point. So I think that there's going to be quite a bit of a shakeup in the commercial market coming down the pipeline as well. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit here. One thing I did want to point out, this is from Philip Meyer, an attorney at the Meyer Law Firm in Williamsville. He said the process currently varies from court to court, and even evictions unrelated to the pandemic are tough to come by. Accurate on both counts. Courts are not all on the same page when it comes to how they are handling eviction cases and what cases are being heard, what cases are not being heard. In addition, a lot of these eviction moratoriums have carve-outs in them that specifically tie to COVID-19. Then you have to try to prove things like that. So it's a very convoluted situation in that way. Property holders, he said, come in all shapes and sizes and face similar financial risks brought on by the pandemic. He has seen property management companies have to make cuts to counteract financial losses as well. Fortunately, we haven't had to go that route. There seems to be a mythology that a landlord is some huge company holding properties across the state. Most landlords that we actually get calls from are mom and pop shops, he said. They may have one rental property or they may have a double and even live in it. We've talked about that before. I don't remember the exact statistic, but I want to say it's like 75+% of all landlords may only own one income property. And a lot of times they don't even want to own that one income property. We call them accidental landlords. People who maybe had to move across the country for work, or they inherited a property when a loved one passed away, something along those lines. They don't necessarily want to be landlords. They're just kind of forced into the situation. Now they can't even afford their mortgage anymore, and they've got people downstairs, upstairs who likewise can't afford their rent, except it's a landlord right now that has to eat the cost. I think they're going to be in a much more dangerous position when the ball drops and everyone has to pay their debts. So there is some assistance available. Tenants, homeowners, and landlords in Erie County, which is where Buffalo is located, who are facing financial woes can get help through a program created by the Live Well Erie Emergency Housing Task Force. The program was announced Monday by County Executive Mark Polenkars to provide up to 5 months of payments for a maximum amount of $3,500 for qualifiers. And then it goes on, it talks about the qualifying guidelines a little bit here. Extending this critical aid to homeowners and renters is another way that we are working to help families affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, Polenkars said. To qualify, individuals must be county residents who are able to provide proof of tenancy or their mortgage. They must also, prior to the pandemic, have had an annual household income at or below the state median income level. Provide proof of loss or reduction of income after March 16th. For a single person, the bar is set at $42,405. For a two-person household, $55,453, and it goes up and up. You can kind of see from there. And then there's a link on here. It's 211wny.org is the website address. You're not going to be able to get to this article. It's behind a paywall, but it's 211wny.org is the website that you can go to for assistance if that's something that you want to pursue. So there you have it, folks. Residential evictions still on hold here in the state of New York, at least through January 1st, 2021. This matches up pretty closely with the federal eviction moratorium on residential evictions. The federal one only covered for non-payment. The New York State, I believe, covers for non-payment. Definitely covers for non-payment. I would have to go back and double check to see if it covers for other reasons as well. I believe it does. I believe that the most recent guidance from the Office of the Court Administrator, I think it is, had indicated that they were basically not looking to process any evictions for the time being here in the state of New York, but that would have been maybe a month or so ago. So moving on from that, a little bit of bad news here, actually. This is reported out of Realtor Magazine. Evicted resident confronts building workers in a deadly attack. This was published on September 25th, 2020. And normally I don't like to report stuff like this, but it warrants discussion. And I know that we've talked about this, once or twice briefly in the past. When you're in the field, you can't act as though you're invulnerable to anyone and everything that's going on around you. I know I've talked a little bit about situational awareness and things like that in the past. I'm not the guy to sit here and try to educate people on that. It's something that I think that most people are blissfully unaware of what's going on around them most of the time. And I think that when you're in a situation where you are at risk or doing something that puts you at risk, you need to be aware of what's going on around you. All that being said, we'll jump into the article here. A resident who was evicted Wednesday from a luxury high-rise apartment in Seattle returned to the building soon afterward, resulting in the deadly stabbing of a maintenance worker that also left a property manager seriously injured, according to multiple media outlets. The incident is yet another reminder during September Realtor Safety Awareness Month of the dangers that exist in property management, particularly as the threat of evictions grows over the next few months. That's definitely something that we're keeping our eyes on. According to police reports cited by the Seattle Times, Michael Roberts, 46, who allegedly has a history of making threats against building residents and staff, was evicted from the building Wednesday morning. It goes on to say she had redirected, let's see, I think I might have mispronounced the name there. She returned to the building's lobby later that morning where a dispute arose between her and the building's staff. Police were called to the building just before 11:30 a.m. for a report of a stabbing alleged that Roberts brought a kitchen knife into the building's lobby and attacked the maintenance worker. The property manager intervened and used pepper spray, but was also stabbed, according to witness reports. I'm not going to try to pronounce that name, unfortunately. A longtime service manager at the Centennial building died from multiple stab wounds. The injured staff member is reportedly recovering at her home. So essentially you have a maintenance worker who was unfortunately stabbed and killed, as well as a property manager who was stabbed and injured. as a result of an eviction. I don't think that this is how the majority of people are going to be responding, but there is a serious risk when you're operating in this business, and you can't be blind to those risks as you operate on a day-to-day basis. Just my 2 cents. It definitely warrants reporting. Stay safe out there. A couple of common tips that most agents will use is making sure somebody else has access to their calendar or knows where they're going to be at any given time. Regular check-ins, either with the office or with, a friend or a family member, somebody who you can contact on a regular basis, letting them know how things are going. And then those people need to know that, hey, if I don't hear from this person for an extended period of time, I should try to check on them. So that's the flip side to that. Moving forward, we're going to take a quick look at self-storage here, and this article is a little bit misleading, and I want to talk about self-storage as an investment segment a little bit. Self-storage street rates lowering nationwide amidst significant new supply and COVID-19 side effects. Self-storage industry has been on an upward trend for years, particularly when it comes to new construction. U.S. currently has over 1.4 billion feet of self-storage space, square feet of self-storage space, of which 190 million square foot or 13% were built in the past 5 years. The inventory burst has led to lowering rent costs around the country, a shift that's been accelerated during the past few months by the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuring economic slowdown. The average national rent for a 10 by 10 non-climate controlled unit was $113, representing a 3% drop year over year, according to Yardi Matrix data. Yardi is one of the companies out there that provides property management software, so I would probably venture to say that their data is probably relatively accurate. Reading the bolded section here, while street rates have fallen quickly and dramatically, many operators are reporting strong collections and decent rental activity. So essentially what you have here is a market segment where there's new construction coming in, which is helping to balance out the market. There's been not enough self-storage for a long time. More people have been building self-storage because it's been a strong market segment. And now maybe you have a touch of oversupply. But I think that oversupply is going to get eaten up very, very quickly as evictions start happening. Mostly because I think that several people are going to be looking for a place to store their stuff while they figure out what their next steps are. The other thing is self-storage is almost, I don't want to say it's completely recession-proof, but I mean, self-storage is almost recession-proof. Think about maybe a time in your life when you had a self-storage unit that had stuff in it, and you may not have visited that storage unit for months on end. I know when I came out of college, I moved a bunch of stuff into a self-storage unit that I want to say I paid on for like 18 months. I visited the storage unit all of 1 or 2 times the entire time I had it, and most of the stuff that was in the storage unit ended up going right into the trash once I finally emptied the storage unit out. So people love to hold on to stuff for extended periods of time. They're willing to pay that little bit of monthly fee to store stuff for an extended period of time. It's the pain index isn't high enough to force them to get rid of their stuff, so they'll just continue to hold on to it. Self-storage is one of those market segments that if you can find a good opportunity in self-storage, I would say jump on it. More so than residential and commercial right now. Self-storage, I think, is going to be a strong market segment for the next several years. And it traditionally is a strong market segment. So it's not like this is new news. We're just into a situation where it's going to become even stronger. So while this particular article might be a little bit on the negative tone, I don't think that this is going to be a long-term impact. I think that you're going to see spikes in pricing, and I think you're going to see a drop in availability as more people move to put stuff into storage. And I think that you'll probably see some more new storage stuff being built. But I think the cost of rising construction right now might delay some of that, which will cause this market segment to operate a little bit stronger. So all that being said, let's jump into some questions from landlords around the country. This first one is, can I keep the deposit? Our tenants have moved out. The lease was up in 2021, though they seem to think it was in 2020. The house was not cleaned and they left random items. They also did not tell us they were moving. The neighbor called and asked us if we wanted them to mow the yard. I called the tenants, and this is when they said that they had moved. However, they had been paid up for that month. She said they were moving out slowly. Now the question, we plan on selling the home, which is in Alabama, Can I keep the deposit for cleaning up and funds to pay for the mortgage slash month of rent slash losses? So this will depend a little bit on your state law and also on your lease. The reason I say that is there's pretty much no state that's going to say, no, you can't keep the security deposit for damages. It's kind of unclear as to how much you really have in damages here, if it's just cleaning and some debris removal, or if there's actual damages that need to be covered as well. In terms of, can you keep it for lost rents and things like that? Technically, that tenant is still inside their lease term. They are still responsible for that rent until the unit is released or until you release them from that lease obligation. By state law, you would have to check and see if you can do what you want to do there in terms of the holding the security deposit to cover the lost rents. Most states, again, probably not an issue, but you may find an outlier state, someplace West Coast, that maybe they won't let you hold or use the security deposit towards lost rents or something like that. As far as keeping rents, you specifically mentioned the word mortgage in here. You can never keep you can keep the rent, the security deposit for damages. You might be able to keep it for lost rent. Are the funds gonna go to pay your mortgage? They may, but realistically speaking, you should be deducting from the security deposit for damages in the amount of the damages, and then if you can claim for lost rents as well, that would be the remainder of the deposit, more than likely, by the sounds of things. That's how I would handle that one. Talk to an attorney on that one. They could probably steer you in a little bit better direction and kind of fill in the missing pieces as to what's allowed and not allowed in your state. Appliance repairs. Question for the landlords in the group. When I purchased my property in Massachusetts, my tenants already had a refrigerator and a dishwasher. My tenants are saying the refrigerator is hot. Am I responsible for their fridge even if I purchase the home with it in there? No, if the tenant owns the refrigerator, it's their responsibility to fix their own refrigerator. I can't see any situation where you would be responsible for fixing somebody else's appliance that they brought into the home. If it's a situation where it's your appliance and it's written into the lease that the appliance is provided at the time of move-in, you're probably going to be responsible for that. You should definitely get that fixed if it's in the lease as yours. But it sounds to me like this is a tenant belonging that was brought into the home. Sounds to me like this is a tenant responsibility. I would kind of push that one back on them. Notifying tenants for maintenance. I have a duplex. It's not fenced. Do I have to give 24 hours notice to enter if I'm going to do some maintenance outside and not inside? I think I got the gist of that question right. Do I have to give 24 hours notice to be outside the property doing maintenance? Probably not. I would say in New York, you probably don't have to issue a notice if you're going to be just outside because you're not physically entering the tenant's unit. Even common areas, I don't think that you would have to make any kind of a notification. I mean, maintenance people walk in and out of the common areas of apartment buildings all the time and do work and cleaning and stuff like that without notifying tenants. I don't think that that would be expected or required of you. That being said, if we're outside doing work, if it's landscaping, we're probably not going to notify a tenant because that's just on our occurring schedule. If we're throwing a ladder on the side of the house, we're going to notify tenants because nobody wants to, find some creepy person looking in their window and wonder why. So if we're throwing a ladder or something, we would notify the tenants just so that they understand that somebody's going to be there and working on the outside. If you're going to be there for an extended period of time, busting up concrete and replacing a concrete pad, or you're doing a major landscape job or something like that, then you should probably go ahead and notify your tenants, if for no other reason than for common courtesy. Here in the state of New York, you have to notify a tenant and give them at least 24 hours advance notice before you walk into their unit. The one exception to that is if it's in an emergency situation, and in my opinion, you better document every single reason that you walk into a tenant's apartment, who was with you, what you did, why, especially if it's considered an emergency entry. I would try to make notification to the tenant right away. Hey, I'm entering your apartment because your toilet is flooding into the downstairs apartment and we need to shut it off, or something like that. So, it's all about communication in an instance like this. Just communicating with your tenants would probably go a long way. But in this instance, if you're just going to be outside doing some yard maintenance, I don't really see any reason why you should have to notify the tenants in that instance. Tenant utility headaches. Landlord in Albuquerque, New Mexico here. I have a tenant that has not switched the electric bill to her name. Every month I ask her to switch it, and every month I get a bill. Is it illegal for me to have the power company turn off the electric so she has to get it in her name? I would give her at least 2 weeks notice of this. So I'm not an attorney, but here in the state of New York, I'm pretty sure if you were to shut off a utility on a tenant like that, they would probably try to use it against you and say that you were creating a constructive eviction type scenario. You're shutting off utilities in an attempt to evict the tenant or something like that. Even if that's not what you're attempting to do, which doesn't sound like that's what you're trying to do here, you're just trying to get her to take care of her own responsibilities. You know, that's the world that we live in, where somebody could try to make an accusation like that. So would I shut off the utility? No, probably not. My lease has a clause in it that allows me to back bill the tenant for something like this. I would just start back billing it to the tenant and telling them that their rental balance is X or whatever the case may be after adding the electric bill into it. So that's something that you might want to consider. I definitely would not go ahead and just shut off the electric. You know, this is one of those things, again, it's a state-specific thing. Talk to an attorney who understands the landlord-tenant law in New Mexico and find out what your options are. But in New York, I would not go about shutting off that utility. That would be a bad idea. Something that you can do to prevent yourself from having this issue in the future is to have a checklist when you go to do a move-in, and on that checklist, add the item utility switched over. So I know that here in our office, the morning of a move-in, we will call the utility company, both gas and electric, and make sure that the tenant has switched the utility over into their name. If the tenant has not switched utility over into their name, they don't get to move in. It's that simple. It completely circumvents this from ever being a headache for you in the future, just by making sure that it's on a checklist and it gets hit before you have a move-in. And we let our tenants know as soon as they sign their lease. You know, the lease specifies that they're responsible for the gas and electric, and we tell them you will not be moving in unless your gas and electric accounts are established and set up in your name. So that's a good way of preventing that from being an issue for you in the future. Sorry it's happening to you right now. Hopefully you can get that tenant to switch that utility over into their name and move on with the tenancy. That pretty much wraps things up for us here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it, and we love producing Ask a Property Manager. The best way that you can help us to improve is by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube. And your question may be picked up in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if we brought some value to your day, do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people, and it's super important to us to reach as many people as we can. Next week's episode will be on October 7th at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be back with another show that you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.